This is CBC Winnipeg News.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Caroline Bargout. Janet Stewart is off this week. The province is looking to update legislation to protect people from predators using artificial intelligence. Proposed changes before the Manitoba legislature would crack down on using AI to generate intimate images. The NDP government says its bill aims to protect children and support victims. CBC's Rosanna Hempel explains what those proposed changes are and why advocates say they're needed.
A new bill introduced this afternoon aims to include fake intimate images under the province's Intimate Image Protection Act. If passed, the legislation would bring more help for people who've had these types of pictures shared without their consent. And it opens perpetrators up to civil suits. Justice Minister Matt Wiebe, who tabled the bill, says the government's goal is to protect and support victims and to send a message.
It may feel easy or simple to do, to create an intimate image, but as soon as you're distributing it, you are breaking the law, and you need to be held accountable for that.
Under the new bill, a fake intimate image means any visual material that's been altered or created electronically, including using AI. That means pictures and videos. Wiebe says by expanding the definition of an intimate image, victims can get help having pictures removed from the internet.
There are some recent images that have been very troubling in Manitoba, and we want to make sure that the legislation enables people to protect themselves.
The Canadian Centre for Child Protection applauds the proposed changes. Signe Arneson says the organization is seeing an explosion of problematic AI content and deepfakes, with thousands of calls annually, including from schools in Manitoba.
The traumatic impacts of having that happen are pretty extensive. So we've got to do our best to get in front of this and try and curtail the issue and really signal that this is a serious thing.
Manitoba follows other provinces, including British Columbia, New Brunswick, and Saskatchewan, who've brought forward similar legislation. But Wiebe says this province would become the first to include language on AI specifically. Rosanna Hempel, CBC News, Winnipeg.
The NDP also introduced a bill today that would make it more difficult for sex offenders to change their names in Manitoba. Bill 23 would require anyone who wants to change their name to undergo a criminal background check. People convicted of sexual offenses would not be allowed to change their names. So would people convicted of some other major offenses to be determined later. Infrastructure Minister Lisa Naylor says those offenses could include homicide and trafficking children.
We have some serious murder cases in this province of people who maybe weren't charged with sexual crime but are notorious for murder and serious murder crimes, and we want to look at whether they should ever be allowed to change their name.
Naylor said people getting married who want to change their name won't have to undergo criminal checks. They're covered by different legislation. Northeast Manitoba First Nation is cracking down on drugs and alcohol. Shamattawa is supposed to be a dry community, but leaders say winter road season brings in increasing bootlegs. As CBC's Josh Crabb reports, they've enlisted the help of a patrol group to conduct searches of vehicles and patrol snowmobile trails.
Security officers in Shamattawa are on the lookout for snowmobiles and vehicles carrying drugs and alcohol. Those substances aren't allowed in the community, but they're being smuggled in, and it's fueling a growing crisis.
Even the drug use, it's getting out of hand. I believe people are using cocaine, crack.
Shamattawa is a remote community connected to the rest of the province by its airport and this winter road. Keewatin Tribal Council Grand Chief Walter Wastesakut says illegal drug activity and substance abuse increases when the vital transportation link meant for food and supplies opens up for the season.
One of the impacts that I think of all the time is that our people are dying. Our people are overdosing. People committing suicide.
James Favel's company, Anishinaabe Ambassadors, has been hired by Shamattawa to help curb the flow of alcohol and drugs into the community.
We've been doing this for a while. This is pervasive throughout most of our nations.
They've set up a checkpoint on the winter road. So far, they've mainly seized alcohol, some cannabis, and a small amount of hard drugs. Favel says people caught by the group and those who don't comply with the search can be denied entry to the community.
Criminalization is not something that we're after. We don't want to see more people, come into contact with the law.
Substances seized are either destroyed or turned over to RCMP. Manitoba's Northern Relations Minister and the area's MLA, Ian Bushy, supports the community.
It's imperative that they're thinking outside the box in some cases to be able to address the safety concerns in their community and the addictions and crisis that they're going through today.
It's not unique to Shamattawa. Other communities, including Tatasquiat Cree Nation and Nissachawayasik Cree Nation west of Thompson, also do vehicle searches. Band member Sherry Schwader's vehicle was searched at the Shamattawa checkpoint last week following a 22-hour drive home from Winnipeg. While she understands why her community's doing it, she doesn't support the searches.
Part of the reason why I got mad is because I don't engage in bootlegging.
Shamattawa Chief Jordan Hill didn't respond to multiple requests for comment from CBC. The RCMP isn't part of the searches. The Mounties say they're doing their own work to crack down on illegal drugs, including patrolling and following up on tips to stop them from getting in on winter roads. Josh Crabb, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Winnipeg's police chief is concerned with a rash of violent robberies involving youth who are in care. Danny Smythe says a 13-year-old boy was arrested in connection to 2 armed robberies, one at a bus stop in St. Vital and one on a bus on Main Street. A machete was used in the first attack, a gun in the second. Smythe says 2 other youths have been arrested after an attack outside a downtown hotel. He says the suspects appear to be loosely affiliated. Smythe says all of them live in foster homes or group homes that don't have the resources to care for them.
Yeah, so the 4, and I don't know if they're listed in the release, they're all linked in by the fact that we have a group of youths. Some of them act out alone, some of them act out together. We think there are more instances where this has occurred. We'll continue to investigate, but I think it was important to bring this forward now because these attacks have been quite violent. They appear random. We want to assure the community that we know who they are, and for the most part now we have identified, charged, and detained those involved.
Smythe says some of the youth in care are also being exploited and victimized. Imagine a Winnipeg where someone suffering a mental health crisis is not met by a police officer, but instead a dedicated crisis worker who shows up and simply asks, "How can I help?" and is there to listen. It's a scenario local organizations in Winnipeg are calling for after several people died in recent months following encounters with Winnipeg police. CBC's Brittany Greenslade takes a look at what other cities are doing that they say saves lives.
Winnipeg Fire Paramedic Service, what's the address of the emergency?
21,000 times a year, Winnipeg police are dispatched to mental health and well-being calls. But local organizations say it's time to overhaul the system.
The police presence is not absolutely necessary, and it can actually do more harm than good.
The Police Accountability Coalition wants community-led crisis response teams to take the lead and be the first line of defense. On the streets of Eugene and Springfield, Oregon, that's already a reality. Emergency calls are often redirected to Cahoots, a mobile crisis intervention unit, teams of unarmed medics and crisis workers. There are no lights or sirens. Instead, a white van pulls up. 2 people in street clothes emerge, there to help. Crisis workers do not have the ability to arrest or detain or force people to do anything they don't want to.
Our goal is the least intervention necessary. Most calls we resolve in the field without transport at all.
Cahoots respond to around 24,000 well-being calls a year. A few thousand of those are a co-response to a police event. But they attended as the sole first response to 17,000 of the well-being calls. In 2021, they only called for police backup 300 times.
Only 6 times was that come lights and sirens. So once every other month in a year, Cahoots is needing emergency police backup.
It's an alternative to armed police interventions, and it's working. They handle 85% of welfare checks in the area, even calls that involve potential weapons or violence.
I Cannot stress this enough. No cahoots worker since 1989 has ever been seriously injured on a cahoots call.
In Poughkeepsie, New York, People USA is doing similar work. They don't carry weapons. They're armed with words and lived experience. All of their team members have overcome addictions and mental health and can relate.
I think people need to hear more from people with lived experience that are in recovery in a good place and hear their stories, because they've come from these devastating, traumatic lifestyles and environments, and now they're in this recovery. And I think it's good for people to know what happened, what changed.
If they respond with police, officers are out of sight and staged nearby. They rely on extensive training.
Get official training by police on safety, on where to stand, how to not block yourself in, those kinds of physical safety issues. We don't do any intervention, a physical intervention of any kind with people.
They also provide law enforcement with 40 hours of crisis intervention training, teaching empathy and compassion.
By the end of that training, they do understand it, and they do have a better tool on their tool belt instead of the taser or the gun or the handcuffs.
And hopefully one day, it leads to a world where fewer people end up dead when they call for help. Brittany Greenslade, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Manitoba's police watchdog has charged an RCMP officer with dangerous driving. The incident happened last August in Dolphin. The officer was attempting to stop a speeding motorcycle and nearly caused several crashes. The IIU says he's been charged with failure to drive with due regard to safety. A number of skilled workers in Manitoba say they're getting passed over for permanent residency. They say it's because of the changes to the provincial nominee program. Protesters gathered on the steps of the Manitoba legislature this morning. The program prioritizes applicants with familial ties to the province, but workers without family ties say they'll be forced to leave once their work permits expire.
So right now I'm very frustrating because nobody can help us to handle this case. I send a lot of emails to the MP office, but I cannot get effective response.
Protesters say they've made their concerns clear to the provincial immigration minister. Last night, in our story about the unrest in Haiti, we inadvertently showed video of police in Kenya. That footage was pulled from an earlier CBC National story about the possibility of sending Kenyan police to Haiti. It was used correctly in that story, but our local newsroom made the incorrect assumption that all the footage in the story depicted violence in Haiti. We apologize for that mistake. The Winnipeg Foundation has donated $5 million to help build the new National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation in Winnipeg. Elders, residential school survivors and their families were on hand at the University of Manitoba today. Residential school survivor Lavina Brown took part in the donation ceremony.
My mother taught me how to speak Inuktitut. That was taken away. It's important that all of you and the future generation to know what happened to us, and that you hear us and acknowledge how this affected the Inuit.
Today's donation goes towards a $40 million campaign to build a new permanent home for the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. The Children's Hospital Foundation has chosen its first champion child from a First Nation in northern Manitoba. 15-year-old Janessa Dumas-Colombe is from Puckatawagan, more than 800 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg. At the age of 5, she started having reoccurring medical issues. Eventually, she had to go from the nursing station to the PAW and finally to Children's Hospital in Winnipeg to be diagnosed with kidney disease. In 2020, Colombe received a kidney transplant. She says she named her new kidney Bob, and it changed her life.
Eventually, Bob was doing such a great job that I needed to visit the hospital less and less. So I asked if I can go home to Puckatawagan to see my friends and family and do all the things I love.
The champion child is chosen each year to represent more than 140,000 kids who use the hospital annually. Colombe is raising money for the pediatric nephrology unit. And And CBC weather specialist Riley Lachuk is here to talk a little bit about weather. We were supposed to get some snow. I saw a couple of flurries when I was walking my dog this morning, but then
scattered flurries.
Yeah, it seems to be okay now.
Yeah, but we have a little bit more precipitation.
No.
Sorry.
No.
In the forecast, Caroline. We'll get right into that because that is going to turn out to be the story as we head into the weekend here. So looking at satellite radar, yeah, we did see most of that scattered flurry activity kind of taper off as we got into the afternoon hours today. But we still did see, especially around the noon hour, some of those stray flurries around the Brandon region, even a couple of snowflakes along highways 2 and 3 this afternoon. So really, yes, we did end up with a nice brighter afternoon and a much calmer afternoon than we saw yesterday, but that is about to change. So as we get into the night tonight, clearing continues across southern Manitoba, so we'll see a partly cloudy overnight period tonight, but I stopped at midnight here because you can see what is the beginning of our next weather maker. This is an area of low pressure originating in the territories that will move across northern Saskatchewan and into northern Manitoba as we get through the day on Friday. And you can see as we start the day, mainly a snow event for the north, but areas like Swan River down into the Parkland region could see some mixing or some rain. By the time we hit the noon hour, the leading edge of this precipitation is moving into the Red River Valley. Futurecast depicting this as rain for areas to the west of Winnipeg. Winnipeg kind of right on that dividing line between the rain and snow. So yes, it will definitely be dependent on the temperatures that we see tomorrow if this is mainly a rain or a snow event for Winnipeg. We see scattered flurries, scattered rain showers for the rest of Friday. And as we get into Saturday, still some outer bands of snow, some scattered flurry activity as we get into the evening before we see a bit of a brighter day and a calmer day on Sunday. The wind's also going to be a bit on the strong side as we get into the weekend here as well. So looking at snowfall, generally 5 to 10 centimeters across northern Manitoba. Trace across the south with more rain, though, through southern Manitoba. So we're looking at about 2 to 5 millimeters, I think, as we get through into Friday. So looking at visibility, slim chance we could see some fog patches again, especially as we start the day on Friday. Some of those lower visibilities depicted on this forecast model here. Doesn't mean, like I said the other day, doesn't mean it's going to be foggy everywhere, but potential is there, of course, for some fog overnight tonight. So 2 degrees in Winnipeg. We got up to 3 this afternoon. Northeast winds at 15. We're looking at a low of -2, a partly cloudy sky tonight with winds picking up out of the southwest at 20 by the time we hit the morning, gusting to 40 with increasing clouds. Gusting to 60 through the afternoon with periods of rain. Looking at a high tomorrow of 5 degrees above our normal high of -1 for this time of the year. Saturday we see scattered flurries -1, and we're looking at a clearing sky on Monday, Caroline, 1 degree, and spring starting late Tuesday evening with below seasonal temperatures.
Yeah, I'm not liking you so much today.
I think I have some better news in the 7-day forecast.
Okay, good.
Maybe.
We'll wait for that.
Okay.
I hope so. Otherwise, you're fired. Thanks, Riley. We have more on a story we brought you earlier this week. There are calls for an all-out initiative to get new dog births under control. This as a population crisis is taking shape in Manitoba. CBC's Cameron McIntosh has the story.
Not necessarily problem dogs, but the sheer number of them is causing problems in some parts of rural Manitoba.
So there's an overpopulation crisis here in Manitoba.
Karina Growinski leads one of 45 animal welfare agencies calling for a $2.5 million increase in provincial funding for spaying and neutering.
There's lack of vet care in many rural communities. And what happens is that this becomes a situation where packing of dogs can happen.
In situations that have gone unchecked, there have been cases of dogs turning feral, resulting in attacks, as dog rescue agencies say they're unable and under-resourced to keep up.
We're basically on our own running volunteer organizations to the best of our ability, but some days it feels like we are really failing.
And running up against a lack of space to foster rescues in other communities. The Winnipeg Humane Society, Manitoba's largest shelter, is at capacity.
We will continue to work on behalf of animals that have been abandoned.
The provincial government says it's working to expand a rural spay and neuter program. More details are expected in next month's budget. While Winnipeg itself isn't being overrun, the head of Animal Services says there could be better coordination of local bylaws governing breeding, licensing, and provincial supports.
if you had basic laws like that, plus you had high volume spay and neuter being brought in by rescues and the government, you'd see those populations go down over time.
In the meantime, animal welfare groups say given the risk for bites and attacks, parts of rural Manitoba should be considered under a state of emergency. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Coming up, aid officials are sharing details about the conditions facing pregnant women and new mothers in Gaza, and they are disturbing. That story after the break. A warning about this next story. It does contain disturbing images and information. Doctors in Gaza are warning about the harmful impact the war is having on pregnant women and new mothers. A recent UN report says women and newborns are disproportionately bearing the brunt of this conflict. Chris Brown has the details.
After years of trying for a baby, Ala Jabbar is 8 months pregnant with her first child. Displaced and trying to survive in a camp in Rafah, she spoke to a videographer working for CBC News. My baby's weight is low because there's no fresh or healthy food, she said. I have low blood pressure from malnutrition that causes me to faint. The UN says on average there is only one toilet for 340 people in camps throughout the Gaza Strip, and expectant mothers aren't drinking water to minimize the need to visit them. The doctor said, "I'm dehydrated," Alla told us. "I've caught infections and bacteria from the state of the toilets." When the time comes to give birth, she can only hope it will be less excruciating than it was for Nerman Abu Saif. The 37-year-old gave birth in November by C-section, but anesthetic was in short supply. "I only had half of the regular amount of anesthesia," she said. She was discharged after less than a day because the hospital needed the bed for someone else, forcing her to return to a dirty, crowded shelter. In a recent report, UNICEF said the babies of 5,500 Palestinian women who will give birth in March are at risk of dying due to a lack of access to pre- and postnatal care, and in part because the anxiety of trying to survive in a war zone is leading to premature births. Dr. Hina Chima is an American obstetrician who's volunteering in Rafah's only functioning maternity hospital. And what she's seen has horrified her.
There are only 5 labor beds, and they're delivering between 70 to 100 patients every single day. I've been seeing so much more stillbirth, and everybody, all the OB staff here, is talking about how much that rate has increased.
Supplies for newborns are scarce and expensive, especially diapers. So at this workshop that used to make wedding dresses, seamstresses sew together leftover cotton wool and nylon to produce passable substitutes. It's a small bit of resiliency, but Gaza's infants and mothers will need far more if they're to have a fighting chance. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
Measles cases are continuing to rise across parts of the country. CBC News is tracking the increasing number of new infections and the concern it's raising. The majority of cases are in Quebec, where many appear to have been spread within the community. Here's Lauren Pelly with the details.
A cluster of measles cases in Montreal has officials on high alert, now at 14 infections.
We've seen that the level of coverage of vaccination is not enough for us.
Quebec launched vaccination clinics at multiple hospitals this week. Provincial officials estimate thousands of kids could be at risk since some schools have dangerously low immunization rates.
In Montreal, there are some schools that are very low, under 50, under 40, and even some under 30. So those are places that are really at risk to have a big outbreaks of measles.
More cases are popping up in Ontario as well. An adult in the province's cottage country got infected from an unknown source, while a child in Hamilton fell ill following a trip overseas.
When there are outbreaks, obviously it makes it that more critical for people to be staying on top of the vaccinations, particularly childhood vaccinations.
In 2017, close to 9 in 10 Canadian kids had both doses of the measles vaccine by their 7th birthday. But by 2021, that dropped to roughly 8 in 10 kids. A small change with big impacts.
Absolutely. We are headed towards major outbreaks.
This physician says unvaccinated children could bear the brunt.
That child is at very high risk for being hospitalized, being very sick, possibly even dying.
Over 100 cases.
So just how big can outbreaks get?
These figures show
This epidemiologist shared her team's new modeling exclusively with CBC News.
Once you get down to 60% coverage, that's here with the 0.6, you see a much larger outbreak that can potentially be in hundreds of cases.
In larger communities, low vaccination rates could mean thousands of infections.
If you end up with sustained transmission, Canada could even lose its elimination status for measles, which it's had since 1998.
Modeling can't predict the future, but experts who viewed the projections say we need to get vaccination rates higher now to avoid those worst-case scenarios. Lauren Pelly, CBC News, Toronto.
The federal government says it ordered a national security review of the popular app TikTok last September. The review was prompted by the company's plan to expand business in Canada. Ottawa says it's not related to recent efforts by U.S. lawmakers to ban the popular social media platform. There are questions about TikTok's parent company and its ties to the Chinese government. Last year, Canada banned the app from government-issued devices due to security concerns. The Federal Privacy Commissioner is also investigating the company's collection and use of personal information. CBC News recently investigated reports about pharmacists at Shoppers Drug Mart facing pressure to bill for medication reviews. Pharmacists go over prescriptions with patients, then the province is billed for the service. The pharmacy chain's president denied setting targets for staff to bill, but internal records show it does. Angela King has more.
Current and former Shoppers Drug Mart pharmacy owners are speaking out. Their issue? This comment.
So we don't have targets or any other kind of element like that.
The president of the company firmly denying accusations of targets for billable medication reviews just last month. But more than a dozen current and former Shoppers pharmacists have told us a very different story.
It was really disturbing to us as associate owners to hear that.
CBC News isn't identifying the pharmacists because they fear reprisal for speaking out. We aren't using their real voices either.
I was very angry because this is not the truth.
He knows full well that they're in place.
But they all had the same thing to say. Shoppers leadership does pressure them to meet targets, and not just for medication reviews.
We have brought this up many times starting last year, that there shouldn't be any targets or quotas when it comes to professional services.
Most professional services like medication reviews and prescribing for minor ailments are billed to the provincial government.
Internal documents from across the country obtained by CBC News show weekly and yearly plans for how much money pharmacies are expected to bring in from professional services and pressure from higher-ups to hit those numbers.
Like this January email from a district manager stating, "I am writing to express my deep disappointment in our team's performance during the first week of 2024. Despite clear plans and expectations, it is evident that we fell significantly short of our targets. I expect each team member to reflect on the reasons for this deviation from our plans and be prepared for immediate improvement." CBC News requested another interview with the president of Shoppers. We were told he was unavailable, and the company stands by his previous remarks. It also said it's reinforcing mandatory training on the appropriate use of pharmacy metrics and how to communicate with pharmacy owners and their teams, and that its role is to help owners by working with them on a yearly plan to deliver professional services. But current and former owners say while they support providing these services, they have zero say in that yearly plan.
It is totally unethical to have targets.
And this issue has caught the attention of Ontario's regulatory body for pharmacists. It says it's working on solutions. Angelina King, CBC News, Toronto.
The Canadian military has postponed its aptitude tests from the application process for dozens of jobs. It also plans to start accepting recruits with pre-existing medical conditions. The move is meant to help boost the bleak recruitment numbers the Canadian Armed Forces is facing. Ashley Burke has the details.
You live for experience and lead by example.
This is one of the videos Canada's military has used to try to recruit new troops.
This is for you.
And here in this room is one of the challenges to keeping them.
This marks the beginning of the testing session.
A 1-hour multiple-choice test known as the CFAT.
You'll be using the computer in front of you to complete this test.
It scores applicants' verbal skills, spatial ability, and problem solving. Traditionally, applicants would have to come into a designated building to take it in person, but many just drop out, says the commander overseeing recruiting.
60% of people who express initial interest in joining the CAF don't come in to do their CFAT.
Just have a read at the question here. So as part of the trial to reverse dropout rates, the military has scrapped the test during the application process for almost 50 jobs. Recruits will only take it after they've joined up, and scores won't matter.
I think there will be more people comfortable to come in and put in the application without while skipping the test portion of things.
Military recruitment is now a critical problem. CBC News reported last week on documents that show Canada's readiness is decreasing. only 58% of the forces is able to respond if called upon by NATO, leading the defense minister to warn the military's been losing more people than it brought in for the last 3 years.
Frankly, it's a death spiral for the Canadian Armed Forces. We cannot afford to continue on that pace. We've got to do something differently.
Another one of those things, an overhaul of the military's one-size-fits-all medical standards by early summer.
People can serve fully in the CAF with low-risk medical employment limitations that right now would be screened out.
The military says the new trial will allow more people with pre-existing medical conditions to serve.
The defense minister said these new trials are a good first step, but more needs to be done to get those recruitment numbers up. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
SpaceX says its mega rocket Starship has been lost as it returned to Earth after completing most of its third test flight. It happened about an hour after it successfully lifted off from Texas. The company said it lost contact as it neared splashdown in the Indian Ocean. SpaceX says it either burned up or came apart during re-entry or crashed into the sea. No people or satellites were on board. It comes after 2 test flights last year. Both ended in explosions minutes after takeoff. Starship is the biggest and most powerful rocket ever built. NASA has been closely watching the space agency. That's because the space agency needs it to succeed in order to land astronauts on the moon in the next few years. Still to come, a rare solar eclipse is expected next month, and now there are protective glasses you can wear so you can safely look up to the sky. That story is coming up after the break. Parts of Canada will experience a rare solar eclipse on April 8th, and anticipation is reaching a fever pitch ahead of the rare event. The moon will block out the face of the sun for millions of people to see, but if you want to watch, protective gear is needed. CBC's Sarah Eldaba has more on how to catch a glimpse and stay safe.
As you can hear, I'm very excited. It has been a long time that we prepared.
The planetarium in Montreal has recently given out over 285,000 pairs of glasses to kids in Montreal schools, and they have more to give away at Jean Drapeau Park the day of its eclipse viewing. People will need to wear them when looking directly at the sun, right up until the moment the moon completely covers it. That moment will be a sight to see without glasses.
It happens directly when the moon is exactly at the same diameter of the sun, and you will be able to see the corona of the sun, which is something very extraordinary to see, in fact.
Looking directly at the sun during the partial eclipse without glasses can damage your vision permanently. This is because the light from the sun is so strong it could damage the retina, the lining at the back of the eye responsible for sending images to the brain.
Unfortunately, there is no treatment for any form of damage done to the retina because of the sun. So avoidance is key.
People should make sure their glasses are almost completely opaque and that they don't have any scratches or tears. Experts say it's best to buy glasses that meet the international standard.
It is essential that you have ISO-approved sunglasses that will block all the harmful intensity of the sunlight. Just using your regular sunglasses is by far not enough.
The American Astronomical Society has an extensive list of trusted North American suppliers, and there are more local sources at eclipsequebec.ca. There are also places offering eclipse glasses for free. Montreal libraries, for example, will be giving them out as of March 18th. Sarah Eldaba, CBC News, Montreal.
And CBC weather specialist Riley Lachuk is back with weather. Would you believe it if I told you every solar and lunar eclipse, when they told you don't look up at the sky, I was like this? Would you believe that? 100%.
I believe it.
It's probably, did you?
Well, no, but we'll find you some glasses.
Because you obey, yeah.
We'll find you some glasses so you can look at it this time.
I'll probably just
safely.
do it anyways. Yeah.
Let's take a look, because we will see a sight here when that eclipse rolls around in early April here in Manitoba. So this is happening on April 8th, a few weeks out yet, but I thought I'd show you the map here. So when this rolls around on April the 8th, we here in southern Manitoba are in that 40 to 60, so about half of the sun will be blocked out by the moon for this eclipse. To get a total eclipse, you don't have to go, well, I guess too far if you're going by the crow, but this is southern Ontario. You know, the GTA kind of being clipped. The Niagara region will be in that full eclipse, as will parts of New Brunswick, PEI, and the east coast along Newfoundland and Labrador. So we will still see some of that eclipse here, but not the full thing, but it'll still be something to see. Daytime highs, we did get up to 3 in downtown Winnipeg today. Turned out to be a gorgeous afternoon. That temperature kind of shot up after the sun popped out this afternoon. But where we did see some cloudier skies, we did see temperatures really struggling to get above freezing this afternoon, which is about seasonal for this time of the year. So 2 degrees still at the airport, 3 in downtown Winnipeg. The freezing mark is where we're at in both St. Laurent and Eli, as well as through much of southwestern Manitoba. Bit cooler up the western edge of Manitoba with those -2s for Roblin and Swan River. Red Lake right now at 4 degrees. And into the north, temperatures around -7 in Gillam, -15 in Churchill, and above 0 for both Flin Flon and the Pas. Your forecast for tonight looks like this. Expecting mainly cloudy skies in northwestern Ontario. Temperatures between -3 and -5. -2s and -3s for southern Manitoba, where we did see some clearing. We will start to see some of those temperatures dipping as the evening goes on tonight, and a chance of that snow starting to move in as we get into northern Manitoba. This is how Futurecast looks at 7 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. Temperatures at about the freezing mark, but that snow spreading toward the south and the east as we get through the day. Norway House right on that dividing line as well, with a high of 3 by the time we get to the afternoon and into the early evening hours. So for the southwestern part of the province, starting with some flurries, maybe some rain through the Parkland region. That starts to move a little bit further south. We're looking at temperatures between 2 and 4 degrees, Caroline, by the time we get to the later afternoon. Your 7-day forecast still ahead.
Thanks, Riley.
You're welcome.
Premier Wab Canoe sat down with Information Radio's Marcy Marcusa this morning. More on what he had to say after the break. There's a big push to get workers back to the office post-pandemic. Much has been said about the need to help revitalize the downtown. Premier Wab Canoe spoke about this during his monthly check-in on Information Radio this morning. He also talked about a topic that's on the minds of many Manitobans, that's our aging infrastructure. From potholes to the replacement of the Arlington Bridge, Canoe says the issue stems from a long-term lack of attention. Here is a portion of that interview.
Really, I think there's an issue with a long-term lack of attention to maintaining our infrastructure, state of good repair. And so we are bringing our budget on April 2nd, and you're going to see a lot of investments in infrastructure. But while there are those kind of new, shiny, big-ticket things that we want to do, there's going to be a significant focus on the state of good repair for roads, for bridges, for the infrastructure. And there's also going to be a predictability for funding for municipalities like the City of Winnipeg. Under the last administration, there was a freeze in place for 7 years. And when funding is frozen with the impacts of inflation, that means less money going out to repair potholes, going out to repair streets. So what we're going to say is, here's the number for funding in terms of operating for the city this coming year, but also here's a predictable 4-year expectation that the city can start to plan around. So hopefully, instead of just a scramble each spring for pothole season, as we just heard our previous guest talking about, there's actually a long-term plan to address this. And then I would say, to zoom out to the province-wide level, about a month and a half ago, I asked our civil servants to start putting in place a plan to deal with a longer construction season. Because already in January, we were seeing those warm temperatures, and we figured, okay, that's going to mean many things, but one thing that it will mean probably is that we have more time to do construction projects this year. So starting with Highway 75 and some of those other really important highways, we're hoping to get a lot of maintenance work done this week, which, by the way, it also puts people to work. So that's an investment too.
You're probably going to make me wait for the budget, but can you tell us how much of an increase the cities could be seeing to infrastructure budgets?
I would like to wait till the budget, yes.
Your government is granting mineral exploration rights to a company in Grass River Provincial Park near Flin Flon. In the news, we are hearing from some wildlife advocates that have concerns that it's putting caribou habitat at risk. What makes you feel that this won't be a threat to the caribou, or that you have enough provisions in place that you're going to protect the herd and protect their land?
Well, I think one of the most significant things we've done is the Seal River Indigenous Protected Area. That's almost 8% of the province's landmass that we're moving towards becoming a protected area. And the caribou migration, I think, really is going to be strengthened and kept intact by this protected area. And what we've done is we've said to the Indigenous nations in the area that in order to respect your self-determination, we want you to lead how development is going to look in this protected area. And by the way, because we do want to do critical mineral exploration, which helps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so it is part of the overall solution to the climate crisis, that we want to say, okay, in other areas, such as the one that you're talking about here, can we do mineral exploration? And what I would say is, if you look at what we've done so far since the election, there's been 2 big mining projects that have come across our desk. Both of them were silica projects. We said yes to one.
You said no to the other.
Right. And the one we said yes to, we believe can be done in an environmentally sustainable way. So while we are going to do mining, we're going to do it in the right way, which means right by the people in the area and also right by the environment.
Yesterday, you had some good news for people in Winnipeg, the opening of the new Wawanesa Tower. 1,300 employees coming back to downtown if those employees choose to return. Now, you have previously talked about provincial employees who are not returning in person to work, specifically managers. What is the province prepared to offer employees to help them make that choice, if that's something that you believe should be happening?
So I think a few provisos. First, for parental leave, I think hybrid options are important, right? Because if it allows people to continue developing their careers while they're taking the necessary and important time to welcome a child into their family and to be there to create those really important bonds. I think that that's important. I also think that, in cases of illness and just some flexibility around and family, that's good. I also think that there's probably some areas of the workforce, like IT, for instance, where you could justify working in a hybrid situation. But the thing that I have a concern about is if we create different classes of employees who work with the public and who work with the front lines. So for instance, we have nurses and healthcare aides who have no choice but to show up at the bedside. That's the nature. If you're working in a personal care home or a hospital, you have to be there. And I don't think it creates a good culture in the workplace if we have those employees who have to show up on the front lines, and then the people who are making the decisions about their workplace who have a choice to stay home.
Could you see a time when the province forces provincial employees, so managers specifically, back to the office?
I think we're still developing our policy here, so we're not in a position to say that there's anything approaching that level. But what I would do is to just offer encouragement. If you're somebody who manages people who have no choice but to show up on the front lines every day, if that's a blue-collar worker, if that's a healthcare worker, another example, then I think you should be showing up in person as well.
Still ahead, Riley Lachuk is back with the last check on your weather forecast. Stay with us.
So let's take a look at your day planner. We have made it to Friday, tomorrow. So we're going to see clouds start to build in as we get through the day. For southern Manitoba, the north, we'll start to see that snow as we get through the evening into the overnight period tonight. By noon, periods of rain start in Winnipeg, 3 degrees and up to 5 tomorrow afternoon. Northeast winds gusting to 60 by the time we hit the later afternoon tomorrow. 5 degrees the forecast time, -1 on Saturday with some scattered flurries. Then we start to see a little bit more sunshine. So -4 for your Sunday, clearing on Monday with a high of -1 or +1. Spring begins Tuesday night and temperatures dipping a little bit, but you know what? The trade-off is we get some bright sunshine, Caroline, to start that.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah. Well, we may be a few weeks away yet probably from seeing any actual flowers popping up here in Manitoba. Signs of spring are already showing up in other places.
A desert park in Southern California is seeing a spectacular spring bloom.
We are familiar with the wildflower blooms in the spring in the desert, but this is off the charts, better than anything we've ever seen.
As far as the eye can see, white, yellow, and purple wildflowers cover the fields. The incredible sight is attracting visitors from far and wide. Park rangers say it's the best bloom they've seen in years.
Now it takes just the right combination of favorable weather conditions to get this stunning result. If you want to catch a glimpse, you better hurry. March is the peak season to see the flowers. They don't stick around for long and are usually gone by the time April rolls around.
They are so pretty. You know who likes to grow flowers? Our show producer, Holly Carrick.
Oh, yes.
But I bet you her garden doesn't look like this, even though she'll tell you it kind of does. It doesn't, Holly. Just kidding.
Is that supposed to be a good thing or a bad thing?
I'm just making fun of her. All right, everybody. Have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow.